right now, when you look at Russia and China and the way they're handling their problems with the United States and with the European Union as well, we've seen the latest Xi's visit to Europe was to Serbia, Hungary, and France. When you put all these pictures together, in your opinion, what Russia and China are doing right now, and how do you find the current state of their relationship? Michael, you can start.
Well, I can see that China is trying to play it both ways. I think when Xi met with Putin, it's obvious that what America is doing to Russia and mobilizing the sanctions and even going to war, all of that is in store for what's going to happen to China because Biden keeps saying China's our #1 enemy. Now, what puzzles me is why China thinks that somehow it can appeal to America's logic and self-interest and saying, look, we can both have a mutual gain by trading with each other. And don't you believe in that the most superior technology should win? And we can produce what you need at a much lower price. None of this is going to wash with the United States. I can see that China realizes that this is not going to work. And China is reported as being the largest buyer of gold in the last few months. And gold prices have gone up very quickly from $1,800 an ounce to $24 an ounce because China's been running down its holdings of Treasury securities and other U.S. bonds, U.S. agency bonds, and bank deposits. And what's it doing with them? It's moving them to safety, to buying gold, because there's nothing else for it to do with this money. It can't buy direct investments because they're going to be hit by the same kind of sanctions that Russia is hit. So I think that China must have talked to Russia about saying, well, we'd better move quickly on how do we reconstruct an alternative to the US-centered order rapidly. And China's exports, despite what people think, the exports to the NATO countries have been pretty flat, but all of China's growth in exports has been to the global South countries. And I think China now says, well, how can we maintain this? How can we make sure that we bring the BRICS countries and the global South countries into our orbit away from the United States? And I think that if the United States is threatening to impose tariffs on all the major Chinese exports, sanctions on imports that China wants to make, and announcing that this trade war is going to continue, I think China's only response is to say, all right, we agree. We see that you're going to levy, you don't want trade with the United States. I think it's in China's interest and Russia's interest to go cold turkey, to say, we'll stop exporting now. We'll stop importing from you because there's nothing that you're importing that we want, that you're willing to sell, and really draw the line there. That would create such a reaction in the United States that there would be an interest group in preventing this. But at the same time, China has to realize that it can replace the American market and the European market with a global South market. It can't do this as long as the global South has to keep paying enormous amounts of money for its dollarized debt to the United States and European bondholders. So I think China should and Russia should very rapidly say, if the world is going to break into two rival sections, we'd better create a whole set of alternative institutions quicker rather than later. Because as America does sanction this and develop its independence, our leverage position is going to be weaker and weaker. So I think that there's some urgency for China and Russia to work together and attract the other nations into its orbit by a full-scale split with the West. And I think that's why Xi hugged Putin.
Yeah. Richard, jump in, please.
Well, I like Michael's implied suggestion, if I heard him correctly, that the emerging market countries that are faced with this mountain of debt that they can't service, if they declared, okay, we're declaring we're not going to pay it, and we're going to use the money instead to shift our trade relations with Russia and China and kind of start all over. This would certainly be a major retaliation, if you like, by the Chinese for the trade wars and tariff wars that we've had now for almost a decade, the 4 years of Trump and now the 3.5 of Biden. Here's some other considerations, I think, that go into looking at all of this. In many ways, starting at least as far back as the visit to China by Nixon and Kissinger, it was the goal to hopefully build on the conflicts between Russia and China that became military for a while in the 1960s, when they had their great disputes with one another. And that one of the first things to say is that it's a colossal failure. The image of Xi and Putin on, hugging each other, which I don't think either of them does all that often, but in any case, hugging each other was a kind of demonstration to the world. And it's very important that American foreign policy, geared at keeping apart two of its most likely adversaries, is a 150% failure. It just, wow. In its way, it is as powerful a message of failure as, exiting Afghanistan and turning it over to the Taliban was, and as many other things happening these days are. The loss of the war in Ukraine, which seems to me a reality, and the deepening dead end of Israel-Gaza, which also seem to me as signs of a failed ability of the United States, not only not to get its way, but not even to get stuck with blame for other people's misdeeds. I mean, it's extraordinarily ham-fisted foreign policy, to say the least. So I am struck. It's not that I want to shift the conversation, but I am struck by the degree to which the United States, and I would be really interested in Michael's, whether he agrees or disagrees with this, what seems to me that the United States has almost given up the ghost. Here's what I mean. You are beset by problems, whether it's the de-dollarization issue. I mean, central banks have dropped the use of the dollar by 20 or 30% of what they had before by most counts. That is being replaced by central banks loading up on gold and euros and yuan and yen and all the rest. But that's a diminution of the United States. It just is, replacing French troops with Russian troops in Niger. Holy mackerel, it's a small corner of the world, but look at it. Losing as badly as they're losing in the Ukraine. Stuck all by their lonesome. When I read this morning that Norway, Spain, and Ireland are all recognizing the Palestinian state, when France did not dissociate itself from the ICC decision to hold Netanyahu as a war criminal and all that, you begin to wonder, what the hell is going on here? I see the Chinese and the Indians and the BRICS almost as though they were sitting around a table congratulating one another. That time seemed to be on their side. And number two, that the United States' desperate, failed foreign policy is advertising to the world that time is on the BRICS side, that they're just not able even to win small victories. And their PR, which used to be one of the great fortes of the United States, flooding the world with communications, with Hollywood movies, with every sort of understanding manipulation, is not doing its job real well. It's not people around the world look at the United States and they don't, what's coming from here? There isn't a kind of dominance they once had. And it becomes almost ridiculous because the leaders keep talking as if it were 1970. They are still giving orders and controlling the world and telling other people what they can and can't do, and telling the ICC what it does and doesn't have jurisdiction over, celebrating the warrant for Putin and denouncing the warrant for Netanyahu. I mean, that's so gross that you're beginning to shoot yourself in the foot here. You can't do that. That's not clever. That's not sophisticated. That's real crappy. And I'm wondering whether I'm reading more into this than should be, but it seems to me that they are losing everywhere, and pretending that they aren't is really not an adequate response.
Well, the question, Richard, is whether they believe what they're saying. For instance, both the Blinken and Biden have said that the reason they're going to impose 100% tariffs on China, and the reason that they're forcing confiscating TikTok, is to increase American labor. And Biden is going on the stump in Pennsylvania and other swing states and saying, once we can block Chinese imports, this is going to be a great thing. The less Chinese labor we employ, the more American labor we can employ. Now, you and I know that that's a fantasy. Is Blinken just saying, and Biden just saying this to the voters to pretend to get their votes in autumn, or do they really think that somehow, after deindustrializing for the last 30 years under ever since Clinton, that somehow the United States can reindustrialize rapidly enough to avoid a complete collapse here? As long as Russia and China realize that what is happening is not simply a war between them and the West, but a whole shift in civilization. What kind of direction will civilization go towards? At least the civilization of the 85%, if not the NATO countries. And I think that if they realize this, and they're certainly trying to create a shadow set of structures in the BRICS plus countries, that I think China is going to be the next head of BRICS, taking its place after Russia. They have to be talking about this, but there's no sign at all of their doing anything like this. So I can see the United States blocking imports from China. I can see the inflation going up. I can see, you mentioned de-dollarization, and that's really the key. If other countries can move away from dependence, not only on the dollar, but on the dollar institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, and the paying the foreign debt, the United Nations itself, which the United States has a veto power in doing anything, and even the International Criminal Court. That it's obvious now the criminal. There have been a lot of quotations from the criminal court saying we're only here to sue America's enemies. We're not here to sue America's friends. We're a NATO court. That's why we've never gone after NATO, American or European countries. We've gone after countries that want to be independent, that want to be neutral. And I was reading the other day the review of the Dulles brothers, and Alan Dulles said that any country that wanted to be neutral is an enemy, or as George Bush said, you're either for us or against us. And the United States is throwing down the gauntlet now. And I think the logical response for China is to say, well, the Americans realize that the game is over, but they're trying to keep it going as long as they can, at least for the next election, because that's what they care about, their election and control of the US economy. And I think what's going through the minds of the American government people is, well, the game may be over, but at least we control ourselves and Europe. And they're letting Russia, China go, but there's going to be a fight in Africa, in Latin America, and Asian countries to try to draw them into the NATO orbit, and they're trying to do everything they can to destabilize the Russian border. We've seen them try to do that in Georgia recently. They're trying to do that through non-government organizations, I mean, the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy, all over the global majority. They're trying to disrupt. As the Americans and NATO go under, the only thing they can do is try to disrupt. And the only way that Russia, China, and the other BRICS countries can protect themselves is feeling essentially what Russia has come to feel. They've given up totally on the West. You can read Putin's speeches and Lavrov's speeches, and he says we don't see it within a generation, maybe 2 generations of any contact with Western Europe again. With the United States, we're going it alone. But if you're going to go it alone, you need institutions to do this. You need to create the same array of institutions that the United States created in 1945 to control the post-war world after World War II.
Well, for me, I see not differently from Michael, but let me put it this way. I know that for quite a while, a significant number of major American corporations who, over the last 20 years, have poured hundreds of billions of dollars into investments in China that are now, to which you now have to add Vietnam, India, and so on. They don't like any of what this is. They don't want trouble. They don't want difficulty. They need to be able to build their exports, build their investments in India and so on. They want freedom to export the products back to the United States and to Western Europe because it's still very profitable. Yet they also want to participate in the Chinese and Indian markets because they are both the biggest and the fastest growing markets in the world. So they have cheaper labor and a better market. That's a 1-2 punch that every business school graduate understands is where you go, is what they don't want all of this. And number one. Number two, I think they understand, partly because they've been ideologically committed to globalization and the neoliberal line of a thought for 30 years, but that they also understand the important point Michael made that I do want to underscore. The idea that by helping, for example, the automobile industry in this country, the gas-guzzling automobile industry, by putting 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, I mean, That's beyond fantasy. That's downright stupid. I mean, let's be really clear. The whole world is able to buy the best electric truck at the lowest price from China. Let's assume it costs $20,000, which would be a good price for a decent electric truck. Everywhere in the world, companies for whom trucks are an input to their business will be able, as they are, by the way, doing in Europe as I speak, they are able to buy cheap, quality Chinese trucks for $20,000. Because of the 100% tariff, the American company that uses input of trucks, which is most of them, will have to either pay $40,000 for the identical truck from China, 20 to China plus 20 to Uncle Sam, or we will have domestic vehicle producers who, protected by the tariff, will charge, $38,000 or $36,000 for the same truck. That puts every American company at a competitive disadvantage with every other company around the world. That's terrible for U.S. exports. That's terrible for the future. And that's terrible for employment in the United States, which even the economists for the AFL-CIO understand that. So something is wrong here. Yes, of course, you're right, Michael. It's for the election. It's to go to Michigan. But to tell that story to Michigan is an invitation to every half-wit in Michigan who has a radio program to make fun of this argument, to shred it, to show that it is a falsity, that it's going to cost more jobs than it gains. What kind of a plan is this? This is ridiculous. Solar panels, microchips, it's all the same. What are you doing? We're making solar panels more expensive for people to install by hitting them with a tariff. What are you doing? What in the world are you doing? This is so chaotic, so thought through, that if I were Putin or if I were Xi Jinping, I would be wondering, on top of whatever Michael said, that it really is game over, that there's something terribly wrong here. I think it would take Michael and me 15 minutes, and we could come up with better bullshit for Biden than he does. And that shouldn't be. Those people are working on this. They got plenty of smart people. What the hell's going on here? I don't get it. The level of miscalculation. You go into the war in Ukraine and you calculate, okay, the Russians are 10 times the size of Ukraine. That's an unfair fight. But we're going to give them limitless money and limitless weapons. We win. And we'll cap it off with a sanction. And because Russia is a gas station, they won't be able to sell their oil and gas, and they'll be dead. And the ruble will collapse, and the Russian economy. That was an unspeakable miscalculation. They didn't understand that Russia could go to China and India and sell all the oil and gas they want. How could you not wonder about that, given BRICS, given everything else, given the long history of China and India? What the hell are you? What kind of miscalculation is this? And the morning after October 7th, you announce that you will back Israel forever. What are you doing? That's not even necessary. What are you doing? Now you're stuck with it, and you're staying with it, even though it's losing you every which way till Sunday. I don't want to beat this horse to death, but it strikes me that there's now an accumulation of evidence of dysfunction. My friends in political science are telling me that Mr. Biden is systematically losing this election. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I don't follow that stuff all that carefully. But I wouldn't be surprised, because if I look at the economics, I mean, it is so disorganized, so chaotic, so self-contradictory, that it really is right up there with Donald Trump's. I mean, there really is. I mean, they're different policies, sort of, but not. It's the same chaotic, episodic, fragmentary incoherence that is explained by nothing other than grubbing votes. And I get, with Trump, it's obvious that he's in the business of winning, so he can steal. But Mr. Biden seems equally vote grubber to the point of just saying whatever he can. It makes really no difference. They miscalculated the support for Palestine across the United States, in the colleges and school. My university, University of Massachusetts, where I taught for many years, where I tried to help build a union and I tried to do a lot of things, the faculty was never willing to do it. Last week, the faculty voted 400 to 300, no confidence in the president of the university, because he called in the police on Palestinian pro ceasefire demonstrators. I mean, things are going on here that strike me as requiring even dyed-in-the-wool economists like Michael and me to take account of something bigger than the economy, which is reacting back on the economics, to put us in the position of having to explain to people why a tariff on half a dozen items is not a jobs creator. That's too stupid. An undergraduate would be given a bad grade for such an argument.
Well, Richard, I think the title of our show should be "Something is Wrong Here." That is exactly what's happening. Now, here's the problem. You and I are both materialist historians. We look at what logically should happen and what is in the self-interest. That's not happening here, and it hasn't happened in Europe. We've already seen Germany commit economic suicide by not importing Russian gas, by starving its industry of low-priced gas and paying enormous prices to get the gas from the United States. The German industrialists and their employees are emigrating. That's not logical. Germany is not behaving logical. Europe is not behaving logical and choosing to be a satellite of the United States. And you talk to the business interests in the United States, and of course that's right. You'd think that the business interests who've invested in China would be strong enough to make the points that you've made to not only the president but to the public in large. But they're not able to. That's not happening. And it didn't happen in Europe when the business interests universally lost out. The business interests in Europe were called Putin's puppets. And that's exactly what they'll be called here. The Amazon and the other investors will be called cheese puppets. Why are you advertising for the country that we're at war with? Well, you point out quite correctly, there's no reasonable materialist self-interest in having broken up the world that was developing so nicely until 1991, and yet America's followed its self-destructive deindustrialization, militarization. Well, the answer is quite obvious. The government has been hijacked. Congress has been hijacked. We've seen how Congressman has been hijacked by the role of money in elections, and AIPAC has outspent the American business interests in buying control of the congressman, as we've seen in the Near East. I think that China is already very concerned about the Near East, as is Russia, because of its role in oil, and the attempt by the United States to continue to monopolize the world oil. And the oil companies certainly act in their self-interest to look at the thought of inexpensive electric cars as being a threat to oil. I mean, if you look back in 1945 to 50, President Eisenhower's huge expenditure on building roads and highways to make America a country of the suburbs. Flight from the central city. All of that has used oil. It was the oil and auto companies that destroyed Los Angeles's public transportation, just tore it all up so that people would have no alternative but to use cars burning oil as their means of transportation. I'm sure that the oil companies are still doing everything they can to back Biden's hatred of environmentalism, his absolute commission to loyalty to stopping this recognition of global warming because of the interests that benefit from it. One way of explaining this would be short-termism, but as you point out, that's not enough. I think that it was really the neoliberals, the militarists, who, and especially the Zionists, who are the root of the neoliberals, who look at the whole world in antagonistic terms, and they never looked at terms in the way that President Xi looks. They never looked at how can we benefit from helping Russia develop, China develop, and the global South develop, and the world majority develop. They were always there's a desire for total economic and military control and a total antagonism of Russia, China, and the foreigner, and somehow they've hijacked policy away from the logic that you and I point out would be in the business interests. So the real question is, why? How do we explain this wrong turn that the country's taken? What is it that has diverted the United States from the wrong turn? I think it's the neoliberals, especially the Russia haters there, and the attempt of the United States to control the world through oil, and that requires Israel as the key to destabilize the Near East and to mobilize ISIS and the terrorist groups to act as the terrorist in the Near East against the Arab countries, to break them up and enable America to control oil. It's a completely different game of world control from the game of how do we have the business interests profit from globalism. Obviously, America's now fighting against globalism, and obviously that's going to not be in the interest of all of the American industries that have benefited from globalism in the past. How do we explain this seemingly unmaterialistic turn in history?
Richard, I think we can focus on Germany and what's happening to Germany. It's so tragic because we see that how dependent they're becoming on China and the United States. The Porsche is producing its cars in the United States. It's unbelievable what's going on with Germany because they can't afford to produce them in Germany. And they are totally dependent on China right now. How China is important for Germany right now. And they cut the Russian gas and Russian energy to Germany. Right now, the United States foreign policy is to pick a fight with China. And Germany is right in the middle of this fight. How do you see Germany right now?
Well, I'd like to pick up on that and also to comment a little bit on Michael's. I see everything he's saying, but let me sketch a possibility and see whether one or both of you think it's silly or overdrawn or something. Starting with Germany. Germany makes Michael's case even stronger. I mean, I spoke about the United States, but you're right. Germany it's an amazing act. Germany is well positioned. It is already by 5 years ago the engine driving all of Europe. It's the dominant economy within the larger EU or the whole of Europe. It's the greatest beneficiary of the end of Eastern Europe because the merger of East and West Germany makes it even bigger colossus and gives them a highly disciplined, well-educated working class to absorb and therefore, build up its dominance even more. It has the cheapest energy of all of Europe by bringing in the Russian oil and gas. And it has an export market, especially in China, that is exploding and that needs and wants German machine tools and German manufacturers. Okay, so everything is going real well. And then I was about to say it shoots itself in the foot, but I would say it gets a large gun and shoots both its feet at the same time. It gets rid of the cheap energy and becomes therefore even more dependent on the number one ally of the energy producer it no longer patronizes. This is stupid square. This is this beyond, and what for? To do the bidding of a country that just blew up its gas pipeline to get even more of that Russian gas into Germany. That's where the pipeline would have ended. That brings, it's just, wow. So here's where I go. The political adjustments in the West, having watched slowly the hegemony in the 90s and into the early century, the hegemony questioned, challenged, slowly, piecemeal, but nonetheless unmistakable. And even before, the United States lost the war in Vietnam. The United States lost the war in Afghanistan. It lost the war in Iraq. It is losing the war. There are lots of signals of trouble. And the first reaction is denial. And the second reaction is pretense that it isn't happening, that you're still in a position to terrorize, to dictate, and so on. And you work real hard politically to line up your ducks. And you line up the American political system very well. And, surprise a little bit, you line up the Europeans so that all of the governments are either center-right or right-wing, or they're center-left that have adjusted to the broader right-wing shifts so that there is center-left, but the center-left looks a lot like the center-right anyway. So then they get a chance to reenact the Cold War. They can shit all over Putin and Russia. That's familiar. They can liberate Eastern Europe. That's familiar. They can do all of this. And so they go there and they celebrate what they have done. And they mobilize political opinion. And we now reach a point where they have mobilized it and moved the political system far enough to the right that they can undo the period of the globalization and they don't need it anymore, they imagine. The problem is an enormous amount of those economies, like the German we just discussed, like the American, are actually very dependent on that globalization and neoliberal. They spent a lot of money and they readjusted their economies, and they are now stuck with having to politically turn on what they economically have invested in. So now my conclusion, and I'm going to use a historical metaphor. When the United States broke away from Britain, it had to fight two wars, the War of Independence and then again the War of 1812. And in both of those wars, Britain, the powerhouse of the world at that time, remember that's the height of the British Empire, tried and failed to crush this new economy, this new colony here in North America. And after that, gave up. You can't beat them. They tried every which way. They failed. And so they decided to turn it over to peaceful coexistence politics. And for the rest of the 19th century, Britain and France made money. Britain and the United States made money for each other, mostly around cotton and textiles and all of that. United States used slaves to produce it. The British made it, sold it all over the world. And everybody made a lot of money involved in this game. Disastrous for the Indians, disastrous for every other textile producers in the world. We know that story, but it was a peaceful. Now, what's to prevent the American business class and the German business class from either separately or together orchestrating the political exit of the last generation, the neoliberals, all of them? Get the hell out of here, bringing in whoever they need, radicals if necessary, who cares, who will allow them to reestablish decent relations with Russia and China. Those countries need a lot of investment. They can get it from here. They're willing to take it from here. At least they have been. My guess is they are again. Give them opportunities to sell their products here. They will let you help build those products over there. That's been working real nicely for the last 25 years. Why not resume it? We were in much better shape before these neoliberals turned on Russia and China. So why can't we go back and reestablish that? And then we will suddenly have the embrace by Xi Jinping and Mr. Putin of, I don't know, Jill Stein or Cornel West. If they thought those people, well, no, I mean this seriously, if they thought a shift, but there'll be people in both the Republican and Democratic Party eager to sell out if they could see their way forward doing that. And you could be backed by the Chamber of Commerce here, whose public statements are in line with what I'm suggesting. Is what I'm suggesting crazy, or is that possibly an image, a vision into the future we might actually expect?
Well, you're describing the same logic of the future that President Xi has described. It certainly would be logical for business to act this way, but that's not happening. The Commerce Department is led by a China hater that wants to do everything that they can to fight against China, thinking that somehow if we can sanction China, we can at least wreck its economy. This is the fantasy that America had of the Russian economy. It's a fantasy. So we're back to my question. Why isn't this happening? I've read what President Xi said along the similar lines that you're saying. I don't hear any American company, international company, saying what you're saying. And I think if they say it, they're going to be called Putin's puppet or Xi's puppet. They'll be accused of being anti-American. The decision is already made irreversibly, not to follow the logic that you've said. The decision is made. This is a fight for civilization described as American control, the American ability to control every other country's economic surplus and send it to Wall Street and the financial sector so that the 1% can grow against the 99%. And if the 1% has to sacrifice American manufacturing, American industry, at least it'll have the military industrial complex, and it will have basically the financial support that somehow you can make even more money as an economy collapses. If you're a financier, then you can make from a growing economy. The interest of Wall Street and the financiers are against what you're saying as the interest for the material producers. And I want to bring in again the role of the global South countries and the debt. You'd think that certainly America would want Latin America and Africa to be solvent enough to buy American products, and certainly to let American industry and American investors take control of the crowning heights in Africa and South America. But here's what I see. Global South countries are going to realize that they cannot survive. They cannot have any government social investment, and they can't have any alternative to austerity if they pay their dollar debts. They can talk to China, and they realize that, okay, if they don't pay the dollar debts, there'll be sanctions. And China and Russia and Iran and their allies can say, well, you don't have to depend on the American and European markets anymore. We'll be your market. If you don't have to pay your dollar debts, you can trade with us. Of course, you will have a balance of payments deficit with us, but we're going to have a BRICS bank that will enable to fund your balance of payments deficit. And until you have the ability to grow and create your own economic surplus so that we can all trade amongst each other as equals and as mutual beneficiaries. That is, to Americans, the devil. That is hell. That is independent from Americans. So the Americans would sanction the global South. The global South will then say, certainly the Americans will be joined by the Europeans. The global South will then nationalize all of the American and European-owned industry. They'll say the era of colonialism is over. Just as we ended old colonialism in World War II, we're now ending America's financial colonialism that it put in place from 1945 to today. And that colonialism has achieved control over our economies, just as the old European colonialism used military force. America's using financial force. We will make by de-dollarizing, we will make a whole clean slate and be able to follow the same materialist logic that you've outlined that Americans should have had with China and Russia that do follow this logic. So what we're really seeing is civilization developing into two different kinds of logic. The logic of what you've described, the mutual gain and material uplifting of labor and industry. You're having that China, Russia, Asia, and they're absorbing of the global South, and you're having the fight against it by the United States that doesn't believe in any of this. It believes in either total control or nothing. And if it can't control the 85% of the population, at least it control its own population and the European population in something near to financial fascism here, and as opposed to socialism in the rest of the world. It will be a feeling of hatred in America against civilizations that are not following or permitting the American unipolar dominance and other countries that are multipolar. But for this to happen, the China, Russia, and the other countries have to create their own institutions to coordinate this mutual trade, investment, growth, and regional planning and environmental planning. I see the United States as ending up very soon as the world's major polluter and saying, well, you go your way, we'll go ours. That's going to be perhaps the great fight of the future. But basically you have the ideological control of the U.S. government is an ideology of such hatred that it says America has two democratic countries as model of the democracy we want to promote. Ukraine and Israel. Those are our democratic models. Well, in other words, you can't have democracy without total fascist control. That's the split that we're seeing in civilization.
Richard, you talk about Cornel West and Jill Stein. I think these two candidates are so important right now for 2024 presidential election in the United States. I talked with Jill Stein together with Michael. She's totally against these endless wars. I think the key issue is to put an end to these endless wars whenever it comes to Ukraine, Taiwan, in Israel. And whenever we have these wars, we cannot have some sort of mutual understanding and some sort of compromise and cooperation. How do you see this case for these two candidates?
Well, given the way the United States works, they have about the same chance of winning as you do. I mean, Michael talks about fantasy. It's not fair. It's not appropriate. I happen to personally know both Jill Stein and Cornel West. I have worked with both of those people in the past in a variety of capacities. They are good people. They are smart people. They have thought about all of this. They have been active across the spectrum of issues. They are the kind of person that a political system ought to select for and promote and put in a powerful position. The most important thing to say about them is that the vast majority of Americans will never hear a single word they have to say, let alone have a chance to hear what their image is of what they would do were they to be elected. The whole thing is an exercise to enable apologists for our system to say, see, we have minor parties, or we have people fighting for election. One of the few things that the Democratic and Republican parties agree on and share and cooperate on is to be operators of a duopoly, of keeping everybody else out of any kind of serious running. They have in place, both at the state and national level, all kinds of rules and regulations and customs and arrangements to keep everybody else out or to keep them marginalized. You can see what they're doing to Kennedy, who has all that name recognition and the money both he and his running mate are bringing to the effort, and yet he too is utterly marginalized, whatever the vote is that he gets. So the sad thing is, the closest we can get to a serious campaign is when Michael, me, and people like us can talk on social media, which we do a lot. Michael does it a lot. I do it a lot. And you can get some alternative perspective out there into the body. But, you're going to have to do that for quite a while. We're in the middle of it before you get enough people thinking in this way to catch hold and begin to form the nucleus, at least, of political action, political parties, political movements in the proper sense of the term. I'm not pessimistic. I think we're seeing it. I think we're seeing, the commonplace in this country of a black man murdered by the police did, in this case, produce Black Lives Matter. That's a very important fact that it did, and that was the biggest demonstration of white and black people about an issue like that I believe we've ever had as a nation. We have now been surprised by the degree of a movement for the ceasefire in Gaza, and now that movement has grown to become a movement against the repression of free speech on American campuses. That's very important. So I think I see things happening. The question is, can these come together? Can they have an appropriate economic dimension and program? And can you get it out to the people, given the limited access that we have to public discourse and the hostility? I mean, I'm also impressed by what the university presidents did. In case after case, they allowed local politicians, donors to the university, police forces to be brought in against students who are engaged in free speech. Free speech on a public issue can always make some people feel uncomfortable. If it didn't make people feel uncomfortable, it probably wouldn't be the kind of issue that would lead people to want to make protest movements and demonstrations and free speech. That's what happens when there's a controversial issue. And the people who don't like the movements that develop will be made to feel uncomfortable. But can you imagine white, racist people going in front of the television over the last 50 years, every time liberal whites in the North did something for Black people or for Hispanic people, and say, this must stop because we feel bad about it, they would have been laughed out of the room. Yeah, you feel bad, Jack, because you haven't dealt with this problem. You haven't faced it. You haven't admitted it. You haven't been active. Yeah, you feel bad. And we understand that. That's part of what a protest does. That's why people protest. The people protesting American independence made the colonial people feel bad. What the hell are you talking? The job of the police is to make it peaceful, the presentation of one point of view and a fair, safe way to articulate the other point of view. You're a peacekeeper between them. You're not a force to shut them down. The hell are you talking? And yet the ability of the media to portray this all as reasonable, to deal with the university as if it were real estate that a university administration can evict you from. I enjoy, because I've done this all my life, explaining to people that universities in America, public and private, receive enormous subsidies of government money. First of all, the private ones don't pay any taxes. That's a subsidy, huge. They don't pay taxes on their income. They don't pay taxes on their property, their real estate in the local community, nothing. And then they get a markup. I've been on grants funded by the government. They pay the money for the grant, and then they have a markup that goes to the general funds of the university. If you add these up together, at least for Yale University, where I was a monitor of their finances for 20 years, they made money every year. The largest single source of income for them was the government. They're not in a position to tell the public to get off their property because the public funds their property. I mean, I could go on, but that's not the point. The point is, well, I go back to my earlier one. I guess I want to disagree a little bit with Michael. I understand everything he's saying. The logic he's giving is absolutely on target. But I would like to leave a little space. He's right. It isn't happening. I cannot point to corporations that see this logic and go up against the government. anti-Russia, anti-China is the coin of the realm these days. It's the atmosphere our political leaders all speak. The Trump people are a little more nuanced about Russia, but that indeed smells bad too, because of who they are and why they do it. But I would like to believe that we may be surprised that you keep doing this, you keep hurting the business interests at some point. Look, the neocons are correct. They have a few times pointed out that they're afraid not of Xi Jinping in China, but of all his allies in the big business community here in the United States. And they're quite right to be nervous about them. I don't think we've heard from them yet with all that they have to say. But I have to admit that Michael is right. If they have to say it, they've been notably silent in doing so for quite some time now, and you kind of have to wonder whether they too won't be snowed under. And here, let me end with another historical memory. There were many, many of the top business leaders in Germany who looked upon Adolf Hitler as a weird, crazy Austrian lunatic. But when he came to power and demonstrated that he could mobilize millions of Germans, they went along. They went along until it was too late and they were done. So if Michael is saying that could be happening here, there is no way to deny that that could indeed be happening here.
Yeah. Well, the key words that Richard said were "at some point." We're at a period right now of very, very rapid change. The world is fracturing quickly. And I'll get, certainly Jill Stein explained to Nima himself on what was probably her largest audience that she's gotten of any media here. She knows, of course, she's not going to be elected. You're talking about getting her message to the people. She knows it won't be all the people. She knows it will be a fraction of the people. But she pointed out a very important thing. Most elections in the United States are between Republicans and Democrats for president are 51% to 49%. They're very delicately balanced. She stated, and I believe I agree with her, that the real enemy of everything that you and I have described as desirable is the Democratic Party. That's the neocon party. That's the hardline Zionist party. That's the party of hatred. She believes that by running and attracting reasonable people from the Democrats who believe in what you and I believe is right, the Democrats will be destroyed. She doesn't believe, and I don't believe, there's any hope for getting the kind of progress in America that you describe until the Democratic Party is over and we have a one-party state. At least if there's a one-party state, it'll be like the American revolutionists thought that they were going to create. Let everybody in every district sort of vie for votes. But as long as there can be a duopoly is worse than a one-party state, because a duopoly gives the illusion that somehow the Democrats are opposed to the Republicans. And you're quite right. You know, and I know that Biden loves everything that Trump did. He kept Trump's arrest warrant for Assange. He kept Trump's tax cuts. He kept all of Trump's policies, except he cut back on the money that Trump was giving to people for COVID. He'd promised $2,000 like Trump had said, and he cut it back to $1,400. I think that there has to be a political crisis in America for the discussion that you and I want to see happening here, and that the way to accelerate and catalyze this crisis is by ending the Democratic Party. That is it and the neoliberals in control of them, people like Blinken and Sullivan and Hillary and Obama. They are the Clintons. They are everything that is fighting against what you and I believe. They are the designers of America's adversarial economy against the rest of the world. And by creating a political crisis that will pay, we expect, to at least make possible either a discussion of the points that you and I are making, or else there's going to be a very large immigration to countries that have not abolished free speech, as you quite correctly describe the colleges having been doing by following their donor class in calling in the police against the students. Just as the donor class has taken over the Democratic and Republican parties in determining what candidates will be on the ballot for winning the primaries to make the laws, the donor class of the universities have decided how to wreck corporations in a way, the same way that private capital has taken over so many companies in the United States and wrecked them. It was the donor class that, and it's politicians in Washington, such as the Republican lady, that have wanted to impeach the college presidents for not being harder line against the students. And some representatives of the donor class have said that they are threatening to defund the university if they do not explicitly prevent free speech, especially by Palestinians, because in their view, to support the United Nations is to be anti-Semitic. To support the International Court of Justice is to be anti-Semitic, because you say that what Israel is doing with genocide is wrong. That's anti-Semitic. To say that the people should be free is anti-Semitic. Well, of course, the Jewish groups here have finally come out and fought against the Zionist groups. So this isn't really anti-Semitism. It's what the Americans mean by accusing people of anti-Semitism, mean opposing the American policy of controlling the Near East and controlling other countries and dominating other countries. Anti-Semitism means anti-fascism, and that is no longer the American, what the Democratic Party certainly, and much of the Republican Party support. So we realize that if people vote for Jill Stein and other third party candidates, Biden will lose, and we're going to get Donald Trump. That's going to be a crisis. Maybe that crisis is going to be so crazy that perhaps that will have a purging effect. Otherwise, we're back to Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, you know, I'm reminded that back in the 1940s and 50s, when the right wing could not stand the power of labor unions and the power of the socialist parties and the Communist Party, they again had to deal with it all by creating the House Un-American Activities Committee. You know, as if these people who had a different idea of where America should go were therefore ipso facto anti-American, whatever it meant. It's exactly the same ploy now. If you're Jewish or not Jewish, but you don't like the policies of Israel at this time in Gaza, instead of being a critic of Israeli policy at this time in Gaza, you are anti-Semitic. You know, what? That's a pure game to try to get more people to be on your side than would otherwise be, by claiming that you are opposed to something that you're not, and that you're dissimulating about what you're really doing here. It's a kind of a cheap shot. It's what happens in every country when political forces, usually on the right, want to shut down the critics who come at them from the left by claiming they're against the nation, as if the nation and the particular policy for the nation were all the same, as if the right wing is entitled to represent the nation whereas the left wing is definitely therefore anti-nation. You know, it's what nationalists do to support themselves, and they usually do it when they're in trouble.
I think
I think what you and I are saying is there's really no middle ground. It's either or. It's either your view and my view of historical materialism of people will act in their self-interest, or it will be this idea of a capturing the government for an almost religious belief in one's own right to dominate. This is not only the extremist view of Netanyahu, this is the American view. The Americans have outdone Netanyahu. They think the Americans are destined to control all other countries. The Christians believe that God has given America this right. This is almost a religion fanaticism of hatred towards countries that are neutral, countries that try to maneuver between the NATO American countries and the global majority. This is what is fracturing the world. And I think it's going to happen so rapidly that the business interests and the progressive interests that you and I would like to see speak up, it'll all be over before they have a chance even to make their case. They're not the owners of the newspapers. They're not the owners of the television stations. The television and newspapers are run by this American religion. It's the American. It's not Netanyahu's bombs that are destroying the Palestinians. These are American bombs sent week after week after week. This is America's policy. Obviously, we need a kind of international court that can accuse Biden and Sullivan and Blinken of as being war criminals, not in addition to the Israeli criminals. It's really the American war criminals that are driving and supporting Israel in everything it's done, because this is part of the American strategy to use Israel as a pawn for the control of the Near Eastern oil and the region, Near Eastern wealth as the region as a whole.
Richard, do you want to wrap it up? Just 30-second,
No.
1 minute.
No, I think the points that we need to make have been made. I think the situation is very dire. I think we have many signs, including direct polling of Americans, that they do feel that the country is falling apart, that the whole world is somehow in a period when Michael says we're at an inflection point or a transition point. I think he's in tune with a great deal of American thinking, even though they would use different words or concepts with which to capture it. I think it's very extraordinary what we're seeing. I find it remarkable. I also find historical parallels. I must say, I think that we are critical of other countries which are theocratic, but we really are like them. The only difference, we have a secular religion. They have a religious religion. We think that the position of the United States within a global capitalism is heaven if it puts the United States in a dominant position in a world. I mean, even this business of referring to the United States and its allies, which we used to do as, remember, the free world. So now it is the democratic world against the authoritarian. This is religious. This is Manichaean religious. This is God and the devil. That's what this is. It's the extreme opposites, one of which is extremely good. That happens to be us. And the other one is extremely bad. You know, this is a dead end. You know, this is not recognizing when you're in a dead end. It's like Israel not understanding that 3 centuries ago, most European countries were able to establish settler colonialisms all over the world. They had the space, they had the money, They had the ideological support. They had the relative weakness in the countries where the areas where they went. But in 1948, to try to set up a new settler colonialism in Palestine, the world has changed. The whole world is now against colonialism. It is not in favor. It doesn't see the colonial master as doing the colonial subjects an enormous favor. None of that exists. In many ways, the opposite. And you can't do it then. And remember, here in the United States, when the conditions were better, the ethnic cleansing was total. We wiped out the indigenous people here in this country, here of the United States. And so we shouldn't be surprised that part of the logic in Israel is to do there to the Palestinians what was done here to the indigenous people that were here before. And we should understand where this leads. And if you don't stop it sooner, it's going to go there because it's built in to the settler colonialism, as is apartheid and all the rest of it. You can't stop it by appealing to the goodwill or bad of these or that individuals. You got to understand, this is a dead end. This is not feasible in the world today. Just like, the South African whites, at a certain point, they knew it was over. They weren't going to prevail down there. It may take an extra 10 years, it may kill a lot of people, but they're done. That's not there for them anymore. They're either going to live in a Black African country or they're going to have to leave. Israel has to figure out, as it will, I think, sooner or later, that they're in a similar situation. The world is not going to let them finish the job, which puts them in an impossible situation, and they have no idea how to navigate. By the way, they're falling apart inside. The military have given ultimatums to Mr. Netanyahu. If he doesn't come up with a plan for what happens after the war, they're going to throw him out, which might give the West the opportunity to make the changes that bring the absurdity, not to speak of the cruelty and the horror, but the sheer absurdity of what is going on here, which is, by the way, matched by the absurdity of the war in Ukraine, since we can also tell you what the end result of that is going to be, not the details, but Ukraine is going to be smaller and richer, and Russia is going to be larger. That's the outcome. Everybody who isn't crazy knows it.
But the crazy people who don't know it are the danger.
That's right. And they're still in charge. I get it. I get it.
Thank you so
All
much
right,
for
folks.
being with us today. Great pleasure, as always, having you both on.
Yes, I enjoy being with Michael and Nima. I want to thank you for bringing us together and doing all the work that I know goes into making these podcasts. And I'm beholden to you, and I want to appreciate it because I know that it's an important part of keeping this going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you're the catalyst.